definitely a controversy, and it's been a pet peeve of ours.
Sure it is.
The 300-mile rule. And first off, state the rule for those who don't understand it, and then the problems that persist.
Well, some coaches are saying that they can travel to the Upper Peninsula, to Marquette, and Detroit Mumford did this year. Eric Smith took his team up to play Marquette, which is fine. I mean, I think it was a neat story that the kids from the city got to go up in the Upper Peninsula and play a game. I think I'm not against what I'm just saying there. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, right.
But that's a little more than 300 miles. And the 300-mile limit is for like Brother Rice, Catholic Central, or any other team that has problem scheduling. They can only go to like Cincinnati's the cutoff point going south, or going to Pittsburgh's the cutoff point going east, Chicago to the west. They can't go any further. Now, it's a little bit different in the bordering states. Like Illinois does not border us, so that's where that limit comes in. Whereas Indiana borders us, Ohio borders us, so there's a little difference there. Well, you can cross over into Wisconsin up in the Upper Peninsula. That's a little different too, but it limits the all-star type atmosphere of games. Like if somebody wanted to go to Florida and play a game, or New Jersey, or wherever, California, if they can afford the plane trip. But I would like to see that expanded. Maybe.
So what's your understanding then of why the MHSAA imposes that rule? Because we are kind of unique as a state in having that.
In the past, when I spoke with Jack Roberts and Nate Hampton and people associated with the MHSAA, working for the MHSAA, I think they're trying to get they don't want to have the kids out of school too long, the travel expenses that would incur. We talked to Lou Battani from Brother Rice and how much it costs for Brother Rice to go play a game down in the Cincinnati area. It's quite expensive,
right.
In the $10,000, $12,000 range. It's a lot of money to go play a football game, but
you don't have to take it.
You don't have to do right. And for scheduling, we're getting back to that. Dearborn Divine Child, they couldn't get a ninth game, so they play 8 games. Getting back to, if you can't afford that expense, if you cannot schedule that game, you can play 8 games. And I remember when Jeff Sturgalis was coaching Fortson, he didn't mind playing 8 games because he figured we're good enough. We're going to get in the playoffs. We're going to play a couple of rounds there anyways. We're going to get our 10, 11, 12 games in. But that's another point.
Right. But the interesting thing is De La Salle had a unique opportunity. Am I correct?
Right. Talking to Brian.
This is what brings us up.
Right. Talking to Brian Kelly, the athletic director there, they had an opportunity. The basketball program had a chance to go to Alaska. They were invited to go to Alaska. Now, granted, that's a long way to go.
It is.
But if the school can afford it, I'm sure they would have to ask each of those players, hey, we need X amount of dollars for the expenses, the flight, the hotel room, and any other expenses incurred. Now, if they're willing to do that, if their families were willing to do that, then they would have, what Kelly was telling me, a marvelous, experience doing this.
Absolutely.
And I think, we're just kind of talking about De La Salle now, but you can talk about anybody.
Right, and if you're thinking about Alaska, and you're like, Alaska, well, that's where they have the Great Alaskan Shootout, the basketball. I mean, basketball is very big in Alaska, and for an opportunity to go
and I think the people in Alaska would want someone from Michigan, the program that De La Salle affords in basketball and other sports too. I know Dan Griesbaum, for example, at Grosse Pointe South, he's kind of miffed that, he can only go to Cincinnati with his baseball team because that's the limit. They play like, 4 games on a weekend, and that's their limit. He said, I would love to go to Florida during that time and play 4 games down there. And some teams actually do go to Florida, and you say, well, how can they do that? Well, those games aren't games. Those are just scrimmages. They're working out down there. The kids come up with the expense money to drive down to Florida, or however they do that, and then the hotel money. So, there's a way of, how should I say, skirting the issue where you can practice, but it's still not, playing games and maybe limiting some of the experiences these kids could have.
And speaking of Brother Rice, they had an opportunity, at least they were trying to possibly go to Ireland.
Isn't that something?
Because it was like a Christian Brothers, which is the brothers that are part of their Catholic diocese, or however you pronounce it. And but of course that was quashed. But I think it was going to be matched with some college football as well, maybe even Notre Dame. I'm not sure, but
I remember some of the coaches, Battani in particular, talking about that, and what an opportunity that would be. There's, football's a little
just for their religion as well as you know who they
That's a little different.
Learning experience.
That's a little different than even baseball. Talking about Grease Pound at Grosse Pointe South, they can actually go to Florida, and other programs do, and they can actually work out in the month of March or whatever it may be. Obviously, all your stuff that you do in Michigan for baseball is in that gymnasium that's over there, because you can't really do it outside.
I guess the question is, and do you feel the MHSAA will ever relax this rule? What can convince them?
I don't think they will. I think they're set in their ways, so to speak. And I feel that maybe there isn't enough of a push to get that rule changed. And if you think about it, what about the people? Just take a town like Ithaca, just north of Lansing. Maybe they're not interested in expanding the 300-mile limit, and so that's not a big issue for them. And maybe people in Hudson's the same way. I'm saying, just different towns. So maybe it's just a minority. The Brother Rices. I know Hudsonville, for example, they had trouble scheduling games, and they had to go to Indiana to play. And I know, talking to their coaches, they'd rather not do that. They'd rather schedule games in Michigan, but they were forced out of it. I don't know how many schools are in that situation where they're forced their hands to stay within the state.
Right, and then a whole nother topic of controversy is, as individuals, if you want to go participate in all-star games like the All-American football game, you then give up the rest of your eligibility for your school year. However, in some sports, i.e. cross country, you can participate in a national event and still yet come back and participate in your sport.
There's conflicting rules there, and it also should be brought up, like, what about band? I mean, a lot of bands are able to go to participate in the Rose Bowl.
Plymouth is going to the Thanksgiving Macy's Day Parade.
And there's no limit on that. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to do that.
Right.
But now you say that's okay.
Why do you let one group say
but
okay?
You say this group of athletes or extracurricular activities cannot participate in that.
Right.
So I find a little dichotomy in that, and I have a problem with that.